On behalf of students and youth leaders from the 100 Million Campaign and the Global Students Forum, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our special event, Building Back Better or Worse, a youth-led response to the High-Level Political Forum 2021. My name is Winnie Nyandiga, and I will be moderating this event today. I am the Vice Chairperson, Democracy and Participation of the Commonwealth Students Association. The 100 Million is a global youth-led campaign uniting the world's largest representative students' unions, labor survivors. Together, we campaign for a world in which every child is free, safe, and educated. The 100 Million Campaign is proudly hosting this event with the Global Student Forum, the umbrella organization of the world's major representative student federations across 119 countries, and the only independent, democratic, and representative global student governance structure dedicated to the rights of students everywhere. This event marks the next step in a journey we, as youth and students activists, have been making together over the last few years. Though we all come from different walks of life, we are united in our shared outreach at the injustices facing the world's most marginalized children and young people. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, we knew that those who would suffer most would be the vulnerable children and young people. And again, since the start of the pandemic, we have seen around 7 million more children under 5 years old suffer from malnutrition. 168 million children have had their schools closed for an entire year. And we have seen child labor rates rise for the first time in decades to 160 million children globally. As young people, we have responded to this crisis by building power within our communities, countries, and speaking out to hold decision makers to account. Also, I have to say that young people, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw young people as the first respondents on the ground. In 2020, that was last year, we launched a joint campaign to demand justice for every child. Ahead of high-level advocacy events, including the UN General Assembly and the G20 Leaders Summit, we held our own youth caucus events with representatives from over 50 countries coming together to discuss the failings of world leaders. This year, long ahead of the high-level political forum, we once again convened students and young people from around the world to demand action that ensures that children and young people would be prioritized in the final outcomes of this year's high-level political forum. Today, here we are. We gather to find out if our leaders have been listening or if they are once again failing to recognize the scale of the crisis or act with the urgency required. But firstly, let me take you back. What is the high-level political forum known as the HLPF? The HLPF is the United Nations space where governments are supposed to be held to account for delivering the SDGs. The process it takes to agree the outcomes in a final ministerial declaration is long and started several months ago. It is important to say that it has not yet finished. During that time, 100 Million and Global Students Forum have convened an independent youth caucus to review the draft outcome documents and to make collective demands on world leaders. Over the next hour, We will be reviewing the key issues identified by this youth caucus as priorities for the rights of the children and young people, and hear speeches from inspiring youth and student leaders and advocates from around the world. Each of these speakers will be highlighting how child and youth rights issues are being exacerbated by COVID-19 and issuing their demands for the world leaders to urgently address this crisis and ensure we build back better, not worse. So back to you speakers. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to share the intervention. After we have had all the interventions, we will open the floor for discussion and contributions from the audience online. So please have your questions ready and share them in the chat box on whichever platform you are joining us on. First up, we will begin an intervention on COVID-19 recovery and the impact on children and youth. We know children and young people stand to suffer the most from the impact of the pandemic. Yet, the response we have seen so far from world leaders to this child and youth crisis has been disgraceful. Speaking on this important issue, today is my comrade Amilcar Sanatan. Amilcar is a member of the Global Students Forum Steering Committee. He joins us today from Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Amilcar.
Greetings, Winnie, and thank you for that beautiful overview to the contents of today's discussion. It should be noted that COVID recovery has now been taken out of the MD as a title, but with little or no impact on the relevant content areas. The Youth Caucus had specific demands on the inclusion of child labor as a harmful practice against children, and to commit to specific support for children and young people who have dropped out of education as a result of school closures. Some of the points we need to address is: one, children and young people stand to be most adversely affected in the medium to long-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, as always, our needs and rights are sidelined. Two, the HLPF and the accompanying ministerial declaration say nice words about children and youth being a priority and the need to invest in children and youth. Yet there's no commitment to how this investment will be financed, and we were excluded from most of the other resolutions, even those on the SDGs which explicitly cater for children and young people. Three, our education systems have been disrupted on an unprecedented scale. Millions of children have been forced out of school and into child labor, the majority of whom were just 5 to 11 years old. Millions of vulnerable children and young people are living in families that have been pushed into extreme poverty or lost parents and caregivers entirely. Our mental health has suffered, and the stagnant job market has become even more impenetrable, and gender and sexual-based violence is rising. Fourth, in low and middle income countries, planned increases in spending for education have been reduced, and we have seen the reprioritizing of public spending being shifted away from the education sector. Fifth, as global student representatives, nice words will not ease the fear felt by our 183 member unions across 119 countries on what their future looks like. Six, the time for nice words is over. For example, you cannot say that efforts on remedial and catch-up strategies for education need to be scaled up, but then neglect to commit to how such programs will be funded. And the last point, we need our leaders to build back better. Our future and our lives depend on it.
Thank you so much, Amilcar, for that. Next, we will discuss the issue of global financing for the SDGs in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that none of the SDGs can be achieved without robust equitable financing for the lowest income countries. Despite recent positive moves like the global corporate tax, it is the richest countries which will benefit the most. Yeah, the same countries which are failing to contribute their fair share of overseas aid. The global financial system is clearly broken. So, joining us to speak on this issue, we have firstly Ankit Tripathi. Ankit is another member of the Global Students Forum Steering Committee, as well as the International Students Representative for the Canadian Federation of Students. Welcome, Ankit.
Thank you, Winnie, and thank you for having me here today. Now, I would like to start with facing the reality that we've all heard during this pandemic. We all heard things like, we're all in this together, or we're all in this together and let's come out of it together. And all of this was a lie. The truth was never the case. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it showed us how hollow these words truly are when it comes to financial support. Only 0.13% of the total spending on support went to the poorest families. May I also point out that these are the families who worked at the front lines throughout the pandemic, many of them contracting the virus, ending up in hospitals that they can't afford, and thereby ending up losing their lives. And this is quite simply because we couldn't make our commitments. In many governments across the world, we also saw cuts to social support, which is disgusting because in the middle of a pandemic, social support, which is supposed to support the lowest income communities in all countries in the global north and the south, was cut. And they need that the most. And at an international level, the access to financing for global south countries was blocked by many countries in the global north. For these reasons, we demand that high-income countries honor and increase their ODA commitments and the recognition of the value of debt suspension initiatives. As a global student movement, we reiterate, because we've said this before, our demand for full tax justice, an ending of taxation loopholes and tax evasion by transnational corporations that steal almost $500 billion every year from the global economy. The majority of this is at the expense of the poorest, at the hands of the poorest, and goes to the hands of the richest. When we emerged from the COVID-19 crisis, we cannot forget that we were already in multiple intersecting, devastating global crises before. An educational crisis, a poverty and inequality crisis, a climate crisis, a crisis in democracy, and several crises emerging in many parts of the world. All of these require sustainable, bold financing from all stakeholders if we stand a chance of ending any of these injustices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ankit, for calling our wealthier governments to ensure that developing countries are also safe and are recovering better from this pandemic. So next, we have an intervention from Ashish Singh, a youth activist from India, who is a core member of Global Youth India, which supports young Indians to engage in global affairs. Welcome, Ashish.
Good evening from India. So, hi, I'm Ashish. I'm 18 from Kolkata, and I'm tremendously distressed by the connection and contraction in public funding towards education and nutrition. I'm seeing my less privileged peers suffer, and I'm here to put their voices on this table. In 2019, 1/5 of LMICs, that is low and middle income countries, spent more on debt service than on education, health, and social protection combined. Children living in countries with high debt burdens and limited resources for social protection, education, and health are unlikely to escape poverty and deprivation. Global response to this debt crisis is too small in comparison to the overall fiscal response to COVID-19. Like the overall fiscal response stands at $19 trillion. And the debt burden on low-income nations is inducing contraction in health and education overheads when the same calls for greater investments. According to the IMF, 1/4 of LMICs, home to 200 million children, are currently already in or at high risk of debt distress. Compounding the COVID-19 pandemic is a looming debt crisis for LMICs, where a growing debt burden threatens to crowd out social spending for children. The G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative, that is the DSSI, has had some effects in maintaining social spending, but only 1/3 of eligible countries have signed up to the DSS. Most of LMCs aren't benefiting from the debt standstill. Current criteria for participation exclude many middle-income countries, home to 62% of the world's poorest children. That isn't very sustainable, as the youth populations who most need this are not getting it. So I call for providing additional finance for COVID-19 vaccine delivery, designing a new international debt restructuring architecture that encompasses the heterogeneous needs of LMICs, reallocation of IMF special drawing rights, and most of all, putting humanity above diplomacy and financial reputation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashish, and even for most importantly, working with young Indians, for them to be able to even engage in such important conversations. Next, we will hear interventions on the key SDG being prioritized at this year's high-level political forum. First, we will hear from Carmen Romero on SDG 1, no poverty. The pandemic has directly resulted in the rates of global poverty rising at the fastest pace since records began. Extreme poverty threatens the rights, dignity, and lives of all who experience it, a reality even more devastating when you consider that more than half of the world's poorest people are children, even though they represent only 30% of the world's total population. So Carmen is another member of the Global Students Forum Steering Committee and a Spanish representative of the European Students' Union. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to contribute to this fora as we did during the first caucus that we organized together with the 100 Million campaign not so long ago. The organization of these events and all that entails proves the commitment of this organization and therefore the commitment of students worldwide with the topics that we've come to discuss today. The Youth Caucus called for a specific recognition of increased child poverty and commitments to child-focused social protection. Unfortunately, neither of these is in the current draft ministerial declaration. Despite acknowledging the increase in extreme poverty as a result of the pandemic and the increased reliance on social protection in many countries, the resolution is a word-for-word repetition of the social protection target in the original SDGs. At the same time, SDG 1 is rare as it has financial target, which is to ensure significant mobilization of resources. But there is only very vague mention of increased cooperation to achieve this in the ministerial declaration. Finally, and perhaps most shockingly, after the lack of inclusion and child poverty, SDG 1 includes a commitment to build the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations to economic shocks and disasters. And the resolution on SDG 1 in the ministerial declaration makes absolutely no mention of this. Later on this document, there is a commitment to cooperation on disaster reduction, but this is focused on government planning rather than people. This is very clearly building backwards. The world's 2,153 billionaires have more wealth than the 4.6 billion people who make up 60% of the planet's population. Several years ago, poverty was seen as a social evil that affected only or mainly the underdeveloped countries, and many activists pointed out that those countries weren't underdeveloped but overexploited. Today, poverty is a problem even in the supposed to be developed countries, and this is happening because we live in a system that prioritizes the market. We are here today to talk about the necessity of putting life and decency in the center of the discussion and to make them the main priorities in all of our agendas. As I have said many times in different events, we are not here to demand charity, but to demand justice. The principle and concept of no poverty shouldn't be something to discuss, but to implement and to put in practice. I would like to finish with a quote from Karl Marx that I believe is still relevant today. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen, and even for most importantly reiterating that it's life that has to be at the center and not markets. We cannot prioritize markets at the expense of lives. Next, we will hear from two speakers on SDG 2, Zero Hunger. Hunger and malnutrition have soared since the start of the pandemic. Not only have food supply chains been disrupted by lockdowns and border closures, but the huge economic impacts on the poorest has meant there is simply not enough money to put food on the table. Of course, children once again are suffering the most. Our speaker is Ifeanyi Ofodu Raymond. He represents Watetezi Africa, an organization advocating for child rights in Nigeria. Welcome, Ifeanyi.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really delighted to share my passion to save Africa and the globe. Talking about zero hunger, to me, I always say sustainability is only possible when everyone is included, and zero hunger is human right. Speaking about all these problems, it is only understood when you go to the grassroots level to understand what is happening. People are dying out of hunger. Our ministers, our presidents are at the upper seat. They are up there. They don't know what is happening at the grassroots level. And it is our responsibility as youths to tell them what to do because we are the first-hand witness. So speaking about my call to action, I will first of all tell the committee, all the ministers and all the presidents and all the representatives to please amplify the school feeding program. It is a policy that has been established, but they are keeping quiet towards this. They are not actually implementing what they have said. School feeding program is a very good way to get these children fed and make sure their nutrition is completed. And when we talk about the school feeding program, we're not just talking about private schools, we're talking about government schools and schools at the local level. Let them include them all. And also, I'm calling on the malnutrition policy, which is the farm to fork policy. The government should please take this seriously. People are dying at the grassroots level. People are suffering. There are policies there, but they are not being implemented. We, the youths, are holding you to accountable. We are giving you that credibility to please save our world. WFP have outlined that 44 million people are at the brink of starvation. And imagine the percentage in Africa and in Asia. So please, we are begging, save Africa and end zero hunger. We want this to happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ifeanyi, and even, for just shining a spotlight on the importance of feeding program in schools. Here in Kenya, I don't know about your countries, feeding programs have a very good history of keeping children in school and not out on child labor or any other injustices. Children go to school because of food. So feeding programs are very important. And even by and large, governments just ensuring each household is able to access food, and just not food, quality food. Thank you so much, Ifeanyi. Our next speaker on SDG2 is Maria Chinche. Maria is the national coordinator for the 100 million in Peru, where they have been mobilizing to ensure children don't go hungry during the pandemic. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you, Winnie, and hello, everyone. I'm here today to talk about the SDG2 in Peru, my country. I wanted to talk about how bureaucratic barriers are preventing the aid from the National School Feeding Program to those who are needing it the most right now. There's an initiative called Ollas Comunes, which can be translated as common pots, and they were born long before the pandemic. They work by providing 1 meal a day for $1 or less. As of May of 2021, there are 2,317 common pots that are feeding 250,000 people, of which 33,000 are children under 5 that are going hungry right now. The problem, they do not have food to prepare the meals. The solution they were given was to use the resources from the National School Feeding Program to provide them of the food that was once given in the schools. Unfortunately, less than 10% of these common pots receive the food, and that's due to the bureaucratic barriers between the ministry leading the program and the local governments. In 2 weeks, we are renewing our government, and that can either means that all the efforts made until today are going to slow down, or that the new government will work faster to provide help that's needed right now. I'm calling our current government to accelerate the work they are doing, and the new government to use the resources correctly, to use them for those who are needing it. We are talking about 33,000 kids that are under 5 years. Above that, there are older people, they are pregnant women. We need the help that this national feeding program can give us, because the schools now are closed and the common pots are the ones feeding the family only 1 meal a day. So I'm really hoping that we can work together to feed the families that need the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, and all the good work you're doing in Peru. Next, we look at SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Specifically, target 8.7 calls for the elimination of child labor in all its forms by 2025. So let me take you back a little bit. Recent statistics from the ILO have indicated that rates of child labor were already increasing even before the pandemic. We know that since the pandemic, rates of child labor in the poorest countries have skyrocketed. This year has been designated by the UN as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. However, we are halfway through the year, and so far we have seen shameful inaction from world leaders to meaningfully address the increasing number of child laborers. First to speak will be Amar Lal. Amar is a child labor survivor who has gone on to become a human rights lawyer and a trustee for 100 million. He joins us from India. Welcome, Amar.
Thank you, Willie, for having me here. Hi, everyone. So my name is Amar Lal, and I was one of the kids who born as an bonded labor, and I used to work in a stone quarry. I was rescued by Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi in 2001, and who brought me in his rehabilitation center, Balasram, where I studied, where I saw a dreams, and I decided to become a lawyer. And today, being a lawyer, I'm working and standing for all those children who are still exploiting by someone. We know that there are 218 million children are involving in the child labor. And after this 20 years, we have seen that child labor data is getting increasing. And even before this pandemic, I'm not just only talking about the after the pandemic. So we can imagine, since this pandemic came in this world, we all talking about the COVID. But what about the other issues? What about those marginalized children and people? There are millions of children, they are getting into child labor. There are many, many children who are trafficking every single day, who are getting into slavery, who are looking after that. Today, we are talking about the online education. We are talking about the smart classes. But we know there are so many children in this world. They have no phones, no tablets, no laptop. How can you imagine that they can access to education? It's been almost 2 years when there are many children, they didn't see a book. They didn't get opportunity to study because they have no access to education. Parents have no work and jobs. Children are the cheap labors, as we all know, and they are acceptable any kind of the work. Parents are ready to send their children for the work. This is the justice we are looking for us. The world leaders promise to children that in the year 2025, we will eradicate child labor from all forms. Today, we are living in the year of 2021, where number of child labor data increasing every single day. This is not acceptable. This is what we didn't imagine. Is this the fault of those children who born into poor family? No. Our government is the responsible for all those children. Our system is the responsible for all those children. We are the people responsible for all those children. They need equality, equality for right, equality for justice, equality for education. They need freedom. They also need whatever other children have. Today, I'm talking justice for every child. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amar, even for the passionate speech. It's very different when it is a survivor speaking about it. And even that is why, as an organization, we push for survivors' voices to be at the heart of all these discussions. Once again, thank you very much. Next, we have Sherin Omondi from Kenya. Sherin is a teacher and an advocate with a community-based organization, Tuelimishe Vijana, loosely translated to Let's Educate Young People. Welcome, Sherin.
Thank you very much, Winnie. My name is Sherin Omondi from Kenya. I work with the young people in advocating for quality education, particularly formal education and skill development. Every single day, we lose children from the classroom to child labor in farms, construction sites, and commercial sexual exploitation due to extreme levels of poverty. Data has been collected every single day, but insufficient attention has been paid to the reality that children are still being recruited into child labor. World leaders and governments must fund and enact national action plans to reach children living with pandemic injustices. There is no building back better in child labor. Child labor should stop. Let us send all children to school and retain them by supporting feeding programs in schools, while we increase financial support towards social protections, also known as incentives to affected families. We therefore call upon all world leaders to join forces and stop child labor by increasing funding in all the affected countries. The funding increment will go a long way in tackling health issues, social protection in every household, sustaining children in schools from their enrollment to completion, and sensitization of communities against child labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherin. Such an important call to, call for funding, because in countries where we're from, we talk about how we have very strong policies. Because of young people like you, we have very strong policies. But when it comes to implementation, there is an issue. Why? Because it narrows down to the issue of funding and finances. So the issue of resources for us to be able to implement these laws and policies is very important. Once again, thank you so much. Our next SDG focus is SDG 10, reduced inequalities within and between countries. Before COVID-19, the world was a deeply unequal place. Since the outbreak, global wealth inequality has increased, and we have seen discrimination increasing at every level. So first to speak on this issue is Linda Eunice. Linda is a feminist activist who leads the Girls Back to School campaign in Uganda. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for that introduction. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Linda Eunice Nakaivale, and I'm a Ugandan youth activist. I work with children, specifically girls with disabilities, to ensure that learning never stops for them during and post the COVID-19 pandemic as a Girls Back to School lead campaign coordinator and a program associate at Raising Teenagers Uganda. The pandemic has widened and heightened the already existing inequalities in education, where many children, especially children with disabilities, have been excluded in e-learning. Exclusion of majority of the children from education makes them susceptible to dropping out of school, child marriages, forced marriages, child labor, teenage pregnancies, to mention but a few. Little or no tangible efforts have been made to deliberately address these inequalities. Financing education is a concrete solution and still remains one of the best options at hand. However, due to the burdens of most developing countries like Uganda, with rather a weak global space, if possibilities are still there, more than world leaders, but rather deliberate action in debt cancellation, funding from richer countries to the low-income ones, and prioritization of the voices of developing countries like Uganda in economic, global decision-making spaces. It's therefore important to note that as countries start to rebuild and recover, there's need for leaders to support lower income countries achieve a fair share of tax revenues, which in turn could fund public services like education, which is instrumental in achieving the SDGs. In addition, a heavy investment in technology shall bridge the inequality gap by making technological devices and internet accessible to all. We demand leaders to build back equal and inclusive, build back better now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, and even for the wonderful work you're doing with the marginalized children in Uganda. Next, we have Bianca Borges dos Santos from OCLE, the largest students association in Latin America and the Caribbean. She joins us today from Brazil. Welcome, Bianca.
Thank you very much, Winnie. I'm very happy to participate on this. And I would like to start here saying that, as it has been said many times over the past 2 years, the COVID-19 exposed and exacerbated the deeply unequal world in which we live. In fact, the staggering levels of extreme inequality, both within and between countries, should have been treated as a global crisis long before this virus appeared. This year, high-level political forum is taking place in a time in which the rates of global poverty are increasing at the fastest rate since the records began. Yet, the wealth and richest people rose by 50,000 billions from March to December of 2020 alone. The huge economic response to the pandemic has also shown that there is no clearly enough money in this world to end inequality once and for all, but it is being hoarded by the richest nations who are able to sustain their power through unfair and unrepresentative global fora. Facing a truly global threat, which demonstrated our deep interconnectedness, for better and worse, where leaders had an opportunity to level the playing field, and they have not. Instead, the only reference to financing services that ensure all people in lower income countries have equal access to basic service, and that means their human rights, is their year's high-level political forum, is the support given through international financing institutions, which has come predominantly through loans so far. We know that loans are not a sustainable way for countries to deliver service and inequality in their countries. Not only do these loans often come with strings attached, they will need to be repaid at some point, delaying, not eradicating the problem. Hardly sustainable for the Sustainable Development Goals. To end inequality, we need to change the rules of the game. Therefore, we welcome the commitment in the Sustainable Development Goals 10 to enhancing representation and voice for developing countries. Only if all the players have an equal seat at the table will we stand a fighting chance at reducing inequalities and building back better.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for calling for practical commitments or solutions so that we can reduce the inequalities. So our final SDG focus for today's event is SDG 16, for peace, justice, and strong institutions. When we talk about the world's most vulnerable and marginalized children, we cannot ignore the plight of the 33 million refugee and displaced children. The first of our three speakers on this issue is Henry Wright from the United States. Henry is the elected youth representative on the Executive Committee for Education Cannot Wait, the world's only global multilateral fund dedicated to education in emergencies and protracted crisis. Welcome, Henry.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be speaking alongside such passionate and eloquent activists from around the world. I want to thank everybody briefly at the 100 Million campaign and the Global Student Forum, Winnie, who's moderating so fantastically, for organizing this event and bringing everyone together to respond to the outcome of the high-level political forum. It's also great to see some other speakers from the ECW subgroup here. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. SDG 16 is my focus, which primarily concerns building effective, transparent, and inclusive institutions at all levels. A good place to start to build back better. The pandemic has exposed the weakness, not only of governmental institutions around the world, but also the lack of social programs that those very institutions should have provided to struggling and impoverished people around the world far before the pandemic. As countries around the world closed schools, millions of children were left without access to technology, completely inhibiting their ability to learn. As a result, tens of millions of students have dropped out of school, joining the hundreds of thousands of refugees and internally displaced children who were not receiving an education previously. Now, this is not entirely the fault of the pandemic. If governments had strengthened their education systems, invested in e-learning technology, invested in healthcare and social programs, engaged in any sort of preparation to care for its people in the event of a crisis, we would not be in the position that we are in today. It is only because of negligence. It's only because of the lack of preparation. It's only because of the fact that the youth voice is not included, those on the ground. And it's only because of corruption that more and more children around the world are dropping out of school, falling into the grip of exploitation, committing higher levels of suicide, and drifting farther and farther from the future that they are fundamentally entitled to. The results of the high-level political forum have shown us that governments are not thinking about the impact of the pandemic on children and refugees, even when the pandemic has hurt them disproportionately. And so I urge governments, do not forget about children and child refugees who have their whole lives ahead of them, who have so much to do and to contribute to global society. You must address the corruption that is eating away at the foundation of your governments, because only by addressing the weakness of the system can we begin to use that system to effectively combat exploitation, to reduce violence, to reduce poverty, and to guarantee children the future that they deserve. There can be no building back if there is nothing to build upon. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Henry. And you raise, very pertinent issues. And even this year, trying to work on building back better on fair share campaigns. and working in countries where we have refugee young people. And we see countries even working on national action plans without including the voices of refugees, yet they're part of those nations. So thank you very much for shining a light on it and calling for responsibility from our government. Next, we have Hawa, Nigeria. Hawa is the founder of Hope for Nigeria Education Fund. This is an organization advocating for the delivery of all the SDGs and to eliminate poverty in Nigeria. Welcome, Hawa.
And first of all, I'd like to sentiments of the previous
How are you there? So are you there?
And so I'll just can you hear me?
Yes, we can, but you're breaking. Are you okay now? Give it a shot. Welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my views. Speaking about building better without ensuring peace and stability for all. So the building resilient and just societies has never been more crucial in today's world. Both social, political, and access to basic rights are being vulnerable, partly due to corrupt institutions and the assault on the rule of law. And this is not just exclusive to my country, Nigeria. Further, democracy is still battling with political violence. Rule of law is constantly undermined because most are facing vulnerabilities to human rights the world over. And more recently, sometime in the year, at a Security Council debate, the Secretary General called for a global ceasefire between parties. Attention. However, his call was ignored, and children in conflict regions paid the highest price. That has seen children traumatized and denied access to basic rights like health, education, and childhood. I must echo his sentiments. The Secretary went on to call upon the Security Council to increase efforts to protect all children in conflict and ensure more done. In terms of my country, with the emergence of global lack of access to when people at the state face the most dangerous protection is
Hawa, are you there? No, you keep on breaking, and we are not able to hear you very well. I'm sorry. Can we move on to the next speaker as you fix your connection, and then we will come back to you? Is that okay with you? Hawa, can you hear me? Okay, as Hawa is still working on her connection, which is normal right now, even as we speak so much about digital divide. These are some of the challenges we talk about, and today we get to experience it firsthand. So our final speaker is Brenda Mwangi from Kenya. Brenda is an international humanitarian law consultant for Agents of Peace, an organization advocating for the protection of child refugees and the rehabilitation of former child soldiers. Welcome, Brenda. Brenda, we can't hear you. You have to start. I'm sorry. I thought I was the only one, but I see on the chat also we can't get you. The floor is yours, Brenda.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. It is a huge concern that there is no mention, let alone commitment, to the particular needs of children, child soldiers, and former child soldiers in this year's year's high-level political forum. How can we build back better if we do not care about the people who are going to change this future? These children become traumatized adults whom we then call international criminals. In the spirit of arts, culture, and in conjunction with the decade of silencing of the guns, I call for more support, especially working in the grassroots level in support of community partnerships and in psychosocial support to children in armed conflict, refugees, child soldiers, and former child soldiers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda, even for the wonderful work you're doing to rehabilitate former child soldiers. Today's event is a culmination of months of work by this youth caucus to influence the outcomes of the high-level political forum. While we have had some successes, our speakers have demonstrated that there is still a long way to go before governments can claim to be building back better. Our final act as the 2021 Youth Caucus will be to create and share a joint declaration on the outcomes of the HLPF. 100 million and GSF are drafting this based on the inputs shared thus far. But now is the opportunity to tell us what you would like included in our joint Youth Caucus declaration. This declaration will be sent to governments to advocate for change in the final HLPF ministerial declaration. So right now, I open the floor for questions, for your thoughts on any other HLPF events you have attended and any statements you'd like to put forward for our declaration. So the floor is open to you, the audience. And remember when I started, I said at the end, after our speakers, we're going to open the floor for you to amplify, to voice your concerns so that we can include it in the youth declaration that we are drafting in conjunction with the GSF. Welcome. The floor is open to you, the audience. So please raise your hand so that we can be able to see you. I see Brenda's hand is up. Raise your hand so that we can be able to see you. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you. Just to be included in the document is need for more psychosocial support, as we've seen that work very well on our end. Such a simple task, such using of mobile museums, whereby you share like positive photos of the life that was before the war, just to help them, especially with anxiety and cultural orientation, just to give them a feel of the hosts are welcoming them. And that also helps in increasing community engagement. That could be one with psychosocial support. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Very important at a time where even among the young people and even by and large the globe, a mental health issue is, a very pertinent discussion that we are having actively, not only in our circles, but across the countries and even across the continent. So the audience, the floor is yours. Any other question, please raise your hand so that we can see you and give you the opportunity to raise any concerns, voice, anything. This is your forum. Amilcar? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Winnie. The question I have was related to understanding that economic growth would have been stagnated in a number of countries in the global south. What could we do to effectively get countries, richer countries, to make commitments to ensure that we have resources to develop in a more even way coming out of this pandemic?
Amilcar, who is the question directed to?
I'm sorry, I guess it was just for us to collectively reflect on and think about in terms of the limited economic capacity of countries here. Even if we make more demands, that the resources just doesn't exist in some of these countries.
Would you want us to include that in our declaration? And yes, we can have ministers do that, because I mean, when it comes to the ministerial declaration, it's all these governments sitting together. So is it a question you'd want us to, to both divide? Ministers, or rather government, developing governments would probably suggest how they feel wealthy countries would help them, and wealthy countries would also suggest how they do that. I know even in our advocacy work together with GSF, we've been able to work, for example, in Africa, Asia, with young people from Europe, and they have pushed their governments to just put more allocation coming to developing countries. But I believe there is much more that can be done. That's a point, to think of for all of us in the audience. And we can even have maybe people in the audience share their reflection on the same, how you think we can be able to do that better as we are pushing for building back better, definitely not worse. Any other question from the audience? Statements? Yes, Henry, the floor is yours.
I wanted to respond to Amilcar's question. I think in terms of what or how exactly donor countries can be encouraged to contribute to the budgets of, or at least development of countries existing in the global south, I think at least from what I've seen working in the humanitarian sector, there has to be a sort of incentive for the countries to donate. I guess it's very rare for countries to donate to countries in the global south specifically because of the moral obligation that they feel to do so. There has to be a kind of economic incentive or a collective social pressure, whereas if they don't donate, then suddenly it's very obvious that they are committing an egregious sin on the world stage. So, and I think it's a harsh and somewhat depressing reality, but considering the finite aspect of money in the world, considering the scarcity, it's very difficult to ask countries to give money away when there isn't a sort of promise that that money will somehow get back to them in another form. I hope that helps a little bit to the discussion.
Yes, it helps. And it actually leaves a lot of questions, but let me leave that for later, yeah? So on our Facebook Live, we have a question from a young person, and this is what they're asking. What can young people do to stand in solidarity when world leaders inevitably fail us? What do you think we as young people can do? Because we are out here mobilizing, we are organizing, but are we being heard? What do we need to do better? Where do we need to strengthen? Ifeanyi, do you want to go?
Yes, I think I can answer that question. As young people, it mustn't be when you have resources that you can help the world. You can help the world by just using your phone, you know? Whenever we tweet out in our Twitters, Facebook, Instagram, those comments make a long way. So my dear young people, I encourage you now to pick up your phone, tag all your representatives, tag your parliaments, tag your presidents, tell them the problems you're facing. Keep doing it every single day. Don't hold back. Don't think they're not listening. They're actually watching and looking at what you're doing. And when you make it sweeter is when you mobilize your friends. Okay, let us talk about this. We are facing zero hunger in our local government. Take pictures, tag all the representatives you can, and tell them that if they don't act according to what you have said, that you go to the streets and fight for your right. That is how they take up the mantle to help people. So I encourage young people, please don't think your efforts are not working. It is working. Just keep tweeting, okay? Everything will be all right someday. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I agree with Ifani that you can make change, rather you can push for change by speaking up. And just a little background, last year we organized in the midst of pandemic online. We had an online advocacy campaign dubbed Justice for Every Child. And we had some demands to the different ministries in our country. And what we saw is government has responded to some of those demands, and it is beautiful to see. So there is power when you speak up. And we are the digital natives. Right now, around where we are, there are so many tools that you can use. You can't go outside maybe for demonstrations because there is lockdown, there is physical distancing. You can use your phone. You can use the internet. Text, tweet your president, tweet your minister. Let them take responsibility. They are in a social contract with you. So they have to reach their end of the bargain. So you can make change. Rather, you can push for change by speaking up. So Brenda, you had spoke. Let me first give Linda, and then if there is still time, I can come back to you. Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Winnie. I hope I'm clear enough. Just to add on what the previous speaker said, speaking up is very important. However, I believe that youth should take up the space and participate in leadership because you see, we have the power to make decisions in that space. If you want change, then opt for participating in leadership and just make decisions because that's where the power is. Power is in decision-making spaces, places, and that's how we impact society. So for me, besides speaking up, we need to encourage young people to take up space, participate in leadership, and make decisions that impact your community, your society.
Thank you so much, Linda. Back to you, Brenda. Your hand was up.
Just to reiterate.
Sorry, Brenda, continue.
Just to reiterate what Ifeanyi said, support is very important, and especially both ways. Yes, it is great for you to give support to the people who are already doing something, but also call upon those people who want to do something. When it comes to mental health, a lot of us, especially last year when it came to GBV, a lot of us were willing to be like the ear to listen to, the hand to hold to, but many people were afraid to come out and say that they were dealing with an issue. So in as much as we are calling upon you to tweet and tag and whatnot, also call upon us because we're willing to help you go through the situation and come back better. Yes.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Solidarity even within is very, very important before we go out. Sometimes it can be overwhelming and it is allowed. So when it is overwhelming for you, you are allowed to rest. You're allowed to take breaks. But once you're done, go back there and hold our leaders accountable. Any other question from the floor? And if any of the panelists wants to add on anything or answer a question, just text on the chat so that our colleagues at the Global Students Forum can promote you to our panelists so that you can also articulate your points. Yes, Hawa, you're back. The floor is yours.
to my fellow panelists, I just have the same sentiment everyone has spoken about. It's mainly about building capacity for youth leadership, because without youth leadership, we can't actually get to where we want to. We can't get to social justice. We can't get to better resilience.
Hawa, we've lost you again. Are you here? Hawa, as you are again working on your connection, let me give Olympus an opportunity to speak. Ifanya, I will come back to you. Okay, we've lost him again to Ifani. Please take the floor as Hawa is working on her connection. Hawa, we are very sorry for that.
Okay, thank you again. So I just wanted to stress on something when someone asks how we can help. When I was speaking about the malnutrition and when I spoke about the farm to fork policy, young people that are educated, that are literate, that are students can access some certain information that the young people at the grassroots level don't know. So this is what you can do. You can go over to the internet, type farm to fork policy, move back to your local government, move to those youths that are the farmers, to those youths that are the ones that get themselves dirty, know nothing about Google, know nothing about the internet, and educate them. Tell them about the things that are happening beyond their reach. This way you have made an impact, directly or indirectly. I have practiced it and I've seen that it works a lot. When I get information like about the SDG, do you know that up to 60% of the population of youth don't even know what SDG is all about at the grassroots level? You can help them know about this. This way you're helping without even knowing it. Please, I encourage everyone, move down to the grassroots level and sensitize. Make them know that things are falling in place and there are policies in place. Thank you again. And I think this is my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Olympus is back, and then I also have Amar. Can I please give you 1 minute before we wrap up? Amar, go. I can't see Olympus yet, but Amar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Vinny. So I will finish quickly as soon as possible. So being a young person, as a normal guy, what you can do, I think whenever you see, is there any person around you, you see that there is any exploiting by someone else, if there is anybody doing anything wrong with any child or maybe any person. So you need to do what is raise your voice, because normally what we see those things, but we skip it, but we don't raise your voice. So I think my message to all of you to raise your voice, because I think single voice can give a lot of charm and a lot of voice. So maybe if you start, maybe there will be a lot of people, they will come with you and they will unite you and you can change and you can fight together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amar. Olympus, are you here? Okay, so thank you for your inputs. We will work on putting this together alongside the inputs we have received throughout the process and share with you all the final documents before we send this out to our leaders. We also urge all of you to take the final youth declaration and send it on behalf of your organization to your national leaders and even share it on social media. We say we are the digital natives. So once it's out, share it on social media so even the young people who are not here can see the declaration and even, join hands and support it. What this event and all our incredible speakers have shown us today is that we cannot rely on the generosity or leadership of our governments if we stand a chance of building back better, not worse. We need to be actively involved. It is down to all of us to be relentless in our efforts to defend our rights and protect the most vulnerable among us. We are stronger when we act together. Thank you once again to all of our powerful speakers and to all of you for your hard work so far and for joining us today. And thank you to the people behind the scenes whose face we are not seeing right now, but they're also making my work very easy and comfortable here. And to the young people who have joined us together with the speakers. At a personal level, I am deeply motivated and encouraged for what you're doing in your corners, for your communities, for your countries. Thank you so much and have a good evening.